Jazz, not jazz. Well, I went to my jazz section and I tried to find outliers, and I found two right away that just jumped out, because of them straddling jazz and another genre, like exotica in some cases or funk in some cases. And then I hit a brick wall, and I had to go outside the genre.
Jazz.
It's all jazz.
In a case of doubt, it's jazz.
But what about the not jazz part of being jazz?
The not part is irrelevant to our purposes here.
Oh no, not another one of these answers.
The not jazz is contained within the jazz.
So, Chris, how'd you approach it?
I went through my jazz records and like you, I look for outliers, weird records by jazz people. And then just I sort of went through a few other categories of albums looking for just hybrids, because I have a lot of stuff that kind of rides the line between jazz and folk and prog. Decent amount of stuff that qualifies as jazz rock, probably.
So,
So it was pretty easy for me.
you were looking in other genres.
Yeah, my big all-encompassing or nearly all-encompassing category of psych folk prog.
well, I felt like I was assigned a record by you the other day, Chris, when you
Oh,
talked about
me?
yes. This is Romano Mussolini,
Oh,
the
right.
fourth was it he's the fourth child and youngest son or something like that of the dictator himself, Benito. He was a jazz pianist, and this is a record he made in 1968. That's a soundtrack for he collaborated with someone else by the name of Plegadio, Roberto Plegadio and Romano Mussolini have made the soundtrack for Satanic, which is a movie I haven't seen, but I would assume that it's kind of done in the vein of like the Fantomas, James Bond kind of international thriller type
Hmm.
films, alluring but dangerous women and dapper dudes, drinking vodka martinis and
Yeah.
loungy international jet set. It's a jazz soundtrack made by the child of the erstwhile dictator of the Italian boot. Who'da thunk? Truth being stranger than fiction and all. This is really a good place to go if you want some kind of groovy sounds as composed by somebody with a bunch of guilty associations, although himself, I don't know, blameless, I think. Okay, so that was one thing. Then another then moving into something that is more directly weird in conception and execution is The Comet is Coming. Do either of you gentlemen know this band?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shabaka Hutchings, right?
Yeah. So this is it's keyboard, drums, and saxophone, and it's big, blurting, blaring, and aggressive kind of cosmic sounds. I mean, the name of this EP says it all. Death to the Planet. So it really sounds like a sort of a takeover by hostile interstellar phenomena. Um, but it's got a sort of rockish beat to it, which I appreciate. And that really sort of is propulsive and moves things towards the dance floor. So if you want to stomp your feet to the cosmic beat, this is the way to go. Then finally, um, going back to the 60s, 1969 to be precise, we've got the album with the best 60s name ever, The Sound of Feeling, on the always reliable Limelight label. Limelight, put out tons of great stuff. Like if you wanted to get like, domestic editions of Musique Concrète and stuff like that, Limelight was putting it out. But anyway, here what they put out was this album by this guy, Gary David, that he executed with these two twin sisters. Yeah, Allison Ray Andrece, Andrece. They showed up later on Star Trek playing twin aliens. Of course, anything they're going to do is going to be a twin. But anyway, to get to the music itself, uh, it's the album's called Spleen, and it is conceived in this very sort of 19th century French poetry kind of way of, just the weight of the world and mortal ennui and disaffection with the way just there's this metaphysical ponderousness that uh they throw on the griddle and cook up any number of sort of really very interesting soundscapes. It's like if you took sort of these vocal groups of the 50s, these white vocal groups that have these very clean, jazzy harmonies, and you kind of, gave them a few tabs of acid.
Hmm.
That's sort of the sound that you would get. It's it's the source material sounds very tidy and wholesome, but it winds up being warped into this parallel dimension of yeah, 60s counterculture. There's a couple covers on here, but really very distinctively done, getting their own vibe entirely. Hurdy-gurdy man and the song and yeah, the sound of silence. But they become these great sort of astral dirges. Uh,
Hmm.
these
Chopped and screwed.
chopped and screwed sound of silence and hurdy-gurdy man. Yeah, this one I think was conceived as an avant-garde project, and it's just combines some unlikely elements. So that is item number 3 for me, and I'm done. So I'll pass the baton to Chris. What you got?
All right. So, my first one is a collaboration between Malim Mahmoud Ghania. I'm probably not pronouncing that quite right, but you see his name rendered in a bunch of different ways, even depending on the record. Transliteration from Arabic and all that. But this collaboration between him, he's a Ganawa, Moroccan Ganawa musician, and Pharoah Sanders. Um, I'm a really big Pharoah Sanders fan, and I first came upon this record back in the 90s, back when it was first released just on CD. And this is essentially, it's kind of what you would expect the collaboration to be. It's Ganawa music, heavily rhythmic, led by and I'm not sure how to pronounce the name of the instrument, Gimbri, Guimbri. It's kind of like a bass, but sort of earthier and rougher. Um, and that, uh, so there's that sound, and there's chanting and clapping, and a whole lot of other percussion instruments. And I really, uh, I love Ganawa music, and just Pharoah Sanders playing over it is really something. This is an intense record. By this point in his career, the 90s, Pharoah had, he had long since become kind of a jazz elder statesman, and he was not generally or not often the fire breather that he was when he started off with John Coltrane in the 60s, and then his first, I don't know, 10 years as a solo band leader, the classic Impulse stuff. By this point he didn't play out very often. He didn't play free. But there's a good amount of of free playing here. He'll keep with them a lot, with the melody for a minute or two, and then he'll go off into outer space. And then, of course, he brings it back at the end. And so, just a really excellent album, which has elements of jazz, but definitely not a jazz record. Number two. Yeah. This is I think the second album maybe from she recorded under a few different names. Her actual name was Jacqueline Thibault. She was, she played a bunch of instruments, I think like guitar, drums, keyboards. She was married to a guy who had been in Magma. So she was part of the French prog scene in the 70s and 80s. And but she didn't record for whatever reason. She didn't record under her own name, or she mostly didn't. And so she put out a series of records under the name either Laurence Vanet. Yeah, this one is under Laurence Vanet, but it's also for some reason under the name Gateway. She put out a number of albums like this, from the 70s, maybe spanning into the early 80s. And I think this is probably the best of them, or it's my favorite of them anyway. And it's this mix of, it's a little proggy, it's kind of folky, it's kind of jazzy. Maybe you'd call it jazz rock. I don't know. I think this one's totally instrumental. Not all of them are, but you can pick up any of these records and they're all good. They're all well done. So definitely recommend this. It's a great record. And finally, moving to this I was going to say this century, but actually this decade. This is one of many records by Psychic Temple. Psychic Temple is the name for sort of a collective run by this guy named Chris Schlarb in Long Beach. And he runs a record label called Big Ego Records. And again, just about everything they put out is worth listening to. And those records, some of the records he puts out as Psychic Temple, it seems like they're usually like big group affairs. Some of them, have a country tinge. Some are proggy. Some are jazzier. He's put out fusion records. It runs the gamut. This one is called Psychic Temple Plays Planet Caravan. Planet Caravan being like that mellow, kind of trippy song on Black Sabbath's on Paranoid. That Ozzy kind of just almost whispers, and Tony Iommi plays this delicate sort of acoustic melody. So here, this guy Chris Schlarb and his band, which includes Jeff Parker, who's ubiquitous on these things, it seems like, on these kinds of records, they stretch it out to like 19 minutes. And it becomes this improvisatory wonder. It's amazing. And on the B side is an original they did called Asueta, and that actually has a Gnawa vibe. So there's sort of a little resonance between this and that first Pharoah Sanders record that I picked. Asueta being kind of the center of the Gnawa culture in Morocco. So anyway, yeah, another great record, and kind of jazz, not entirely jazz. On to you, Jackson.
Okay. Yeah, I had a hard time, especially fishing through my jazz collection, but I found this right off, which is Sorcery by Sabu, which is a nickname for Luis Martinez, who is a was a top tier session guy for Latin jazz groups. And in this record, he went on to become a band leader and put together this drum ensemble, which was supposed to be analogous with the animal nature in general from 1958. Uh, I'm going to read a little bit from the back credits here. The brooding heat that makes Fused every mite and molecule it touches has teemed into being a million forms of curious life, forms in the water, on land, in the earth, and in the air, forms that live on other forms or within them. Even their diseases are themselves new forms of life spongingly multiplying amid death everywhere in an eternal cycle that produces its own whirring, multifarious cacophony like the inner workings of a monstrous biological machine turned loose and run amok. Wow. Can it live up to that? Man, the white collar animal occasionally inserts a prying boat. So yeah, Sabu. So what it really is he's the band leader.
Liner notes are a lost art form. Sorry.
Yeah, that was a run-on sentence, I think. It's more African than jazz because of the percussion ensemble. There's like five hand percussionists and four conga players. He is a conga player, right? And there's jungle calls and yelps. And besides the hand percussion, there's horns. There's like a bass instrument, oboe, and lots of gongs. And also animal sounds mixed in. So it's very elemental and voodoo-like, according to the title, sorcery. It has Middle Eastern flavors and parts, and it's sort of akin to Latin exotica rather than South Pacific exotica. Yeah, and it's on Columbia, and I see it in the bins, so it is obtainable. This is the one I had a hard time with. This actually came from not my jazz section, but my classical ambient section. And it is Harold Budd, produced by Brian Eno, but it sounds nothing like Eno. The Pavilion of Dreams. Jazz connection here is uh, is the first song, which takes up almost half the album, 23 minutes. Is featuring Marion Brown, the outside sax player. So that first track definitely sounds a little jazzy. And otherwise, it sounds more classical than ambient for the remaining tracks. So the first track is Bishmali, which is an Arabic god from the Quran. And that's the one that Marion Brown plays sax on. The next song is two songs combined together are rewrites of Pharoah Sanders and Coltrane compositions, but they sound nothing like it. This is more of a shimmering uh, ambient classical piece overall. It's got glockenspiel, marimba, and voice that sounds, because of the portamento in the voice, the slurring of the voice, it sounds more like a theremin. So yes, this one's harder to like at first, but it does open up on repeated listenings. It's got a different cover. It's been re-released several times. Originally on Obscure Records in 1978. That's when it came out. Also, it was re-released by Editions EG for collectors, and then more recently by Superior Viaduct 2 years ago in 22. So it's easy to find and it would be a great addition to an ambient collection because it's very different than Eno or any of the other ambient guys and ladies. This is an explosive record by James Blood Ulmer, who is a jazz guitarist, an iconoclast. He's got a very unique style, which is fractured and rhythmic and textured and really spanning in just a subtle way the no wave movement. Also the funk movement. Okay, so it's from 1980. It's called Are You Glad to Be in America? This is one of his anthems. He wrote two for this album, the name of the album. Also, Jazz is the Teacher and Funk is the Preacher. So it's guitar, sax, and trumpet, and you might describe it as skittery skronk. It's raw, explosive. It's got a punk energy to it. It's no holds barred, organic romp. It's exciting and varied. Some of the stuff like the first song layout is just like pure outside jazz or no wave. It's hard to distinguish between the two genres. And those are my three. Highly recommend this to any jazz collector. It's out there. You can find it, and it's on Rough Trade. So that's indicative. That's not really a jazz label, is it?
Nope.
Oh, it's a label that named itself after prostitution.
It's like saying Candyman 3 times into the mirror.
I haven't painted my nails.
Won't make it blur the boundaries.
Jazz is the preacher, funk is the teacher.